Amara Velden never imagined her perfect life would collapse the moment she opened her bedroom door and found her husband, Rowan Velden, tangled in the arms of her own mother, Seraphine Vale. What began as a devastating betrayal soon spiraled into a disappearance, a hidden journal, and a shocking truth that would haunt the quiet town of Riverwynd forever. Amara Velden spent most of her days believing she lived inside a quiet and predictable world. Riverwynd was a small town where little changed, where people greeted each other on the streets and trusted their neighbors without question. Amara enjoyed that simple stability. As the school librarian, she surrounded herself with stories, yet none felt as comforting as the life she believed she had built with her husband, Rowan Velden. Their home sat at the edge of a wooded path, always filled with the scent of pine and morning light. It was the sort of place people described as peaceful, almost untouched by hardship. Rowan worked as a carpenter whose hands were always busy shaping pieces of wood into something beautiful. Everyone in Riverwynd trusted him. He fixed porches, built cabinets, and offered his skills to anyone who needed help. To the townspeople, he seemed like a man who would never betray anyone, especially not his wife. Amara believed that too, and she never questioned the life they shared. Their routines were simple and familiar. Breakfast together, long workdays apart, evenings spent watching the news or tending the small herb garden behind the house. Amara often told herself she was lucky. When her mother, Seraphine Vale, moved in, Amara welcomed the change. Seraphine had been weakened by an illness that required long recovery. She was restless by nature and disliked hospitals, so Amara insisted she stay with them until she fully recovered. Rowan agreed without hesitation. To Amara, it felt like the right decision. It brought a sense of comfort to know her mother was safe under her roof. The house became livelier, more crowded, but in a pleasant way at first. Amara liked hearing two sets of footsteps in the morning and the occasional sound of Seraphine humming in the kitchen. But as the days passed, something subtle began to shift. Amara could not name it at first. There were small things, barely noticeable on their own, yet each one left a faint trace in her mind. She would find the front door unlocked, even though she was certain she locked it before bed. She would wake at night, hearing faint footsteps in the hallway, slower and heavier than Rowan's usual steps. Sometimes she found the living room lamp burning long after everyone should have been asleep. These things made her uneasy, though she tried to explain them away as stress or forgetfulness. Another change came in the form of whispered sounds she heard late at night. They were too soft to understand, but their presence felt out of place. Amara told herself it was the sound of the television, or perhaps Seraphine talking in her sleep. Yet something about the pattern of those whispers made her stomach tighten, as if the house was holding secrets she was not meant to hear. Riverwind's residents noticed subtle differences too. A neighbor once mentioned seeing Rowan walking near the woods at odd hours. Another claimed Seraphine looked unusually vibrant for someone still recovering from illness. Amara dismissed these comments politely, never imagining they could be clues to something dangerous. She trusted both Rowan and Seraphine deeply and believed nothing in her home could possibly be wrong. However, there was one moment Amara never forgot. She had come home early one afternoon, and as she walked inside, she sensed something strange, an unfamiliar stillness, heavier than silence, as if the house paused in the middle of a breath. She brushed it off, telling herself she was imagining things. She continued through her day, shelving books, preparing dinner, and convincing herself that nothing was out of place. But the feeling stayed with her. A quiet warning she didn't yet understand. She had no idea that the secrets growing inside her home were far darker than she imagined, or that her life was only days away from falling apart.
Amara returned home on a gray afternoon when the sky looked swollen with rain. She had finished her work early because a power outage had shut down the library. As she walked along the familiar path leading to her house, she felt a strange pressure in her chest, though she could not understand why. The wind carried the smell of wet earth, and the quietness around her felt heavier than usual, as if the world itself was waiting for something to unfold. She reached the porch, noticing the front door was slightly ajar. That small detail made her pause, but she pushed it open, convincing herself that Rowan must have stepped outside for a moment, or Seraphine had forgotten to close it properly. Inside, the air felt different, warmer, almost suffocating. The house, which normally welcomed her with soft light and familiar scents, felt unfamiliar. Something was off, but her mind refused to accept the possibility of anything alarming. She set her bag on the table and called out for Rowan and Seraphine, though she already sensed no one would answer. The silence around her thickened as she walked through the hallway, each step echoing slightly, as if the walls were responding. She reached the bedroom door and noticed it was closed, a rare occurrence during the day. Her hand trembled as she touched the doorknob. She hesitated, telling herself she was overthinking, yet the strange quietness around her made her breath quicken. She opened the door slowly, expecting to find an ordinary scene, something normal that would erase her unease. Instead, she stepped into the moment that would split her life in two. Rowan and Seraphine lay together on the bed, entangled in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. Amara's vision blurred, her heartbeat hammered against her ribs, and her legs weakened as she tried to process the sight before her. Her mother, her own mother, and the man she trusted more than anyone were together in the most intimate way possible. She felt as though the ground beneath her had collapsed, leaving her suspended in a void where nothing made sense. There was no rage at first, only shock, a deep spreading numbness that wrapped around her like ice. Her mind tried to identify any sign that this was a misunderstanding, a trick of the light, a dream she could blink away. But the reality was solid, undeniable, and devastating. She stepped back, unable to breathe, unable to speak, and fled the room before either of them noticed her presence. She didn't remember walking out of the house. One moment she was inside, drowning in disbelief, and the next she was on the porch again, clutching the railing so tightly her knuckles whitened. The air outside was cold, but her body felt feverish. A sharp sting of betrayal spread through her chest, not once, but twice, from the two people she believed would never hurt her. Seraphine was the woman who raised her, held her hand through every hardship. Rowan was the man who promised her a life built on trust. Suddenly, everything she depended on had turned into something twisted and cruel. As Amara staggered down the steps, a neighbor across the street watched her with concern. Word traveled quickly in Riverwynd, faster than anyone expected. By the time Amara reached the end of the block, the whisper of gossip had already begun spreading. The quiet town, always hungry for stories, grabbed hold of her tragedy and repeated it in hushed tones, adding assumptions and theories with each retelling. That night, she stayed at a small inn near the river, unable to return home. The shock continued to pulse through her, each wave stronger than the last. She stared out the window for hours, trying to understand how long the betrayal had been happening, replaying memories that suddenly felt distorted. Every late-night whisper, every unlocked door, every uneasy moment, now it all connected into a pattern she had refused to see. She knew she needed answers, but she also knew she wasn't ready to face Rowan or Seraphine. The truth had broken her once already, and she feared what deeper truths might still be hidden. Yet something inside her whispered that this was only the beginning, that the betrayal she witnessed was just the first layer of a much darker story waiting to unfold. The morning after Amara fled her home,
Riverwynd buzzed with quiet tension. The sun rose behind heavy clouds, casting a dim light over the town, as if the sky itself sensed the turmoil beneath it. Amara sat alone in her small inn-room, staring at the wall with red, sleepless eyes. She felt hollow, as though her emotions had burned out overnight, leaving only a dull ache. She knew she needed to confront what happened, yet fear rooted her to the chair. She could not imagine looking at Rowan or Seraphine again, not after seeing the truth laid bare in her own bedroom. A sudden knock on the door startled her. When she opened it, Sheriff Malin Rook stood there with a serious expression. He informed her that Rowan had not been seen since the early morning. His truck remained in the driveway, and his wallet and phone were still inside the house. The sheriff asked if Amara had any idea where he might have gone. She shook her head, struggling to explain that she had left after discovering something traumatic. She did not mention the details, unable to form the words. Sheriff Rook nodded gently, but looked troubled. By midday, the entire town knew Rowan Velden had vanished. Search teams spread out into the surrounding woods, calling his name, beating sticks against tree trunks, and scouring the riverbanks for any sign of him. Volunteers combed through overgrown trails and small abandoned cabins that hunters sometimes used. Amara remained at the edge of the search area, watching the teams move through the trees with growing anxiety. She wanted to help, but every step felt weighed down by the memory she could not escape. Inside the house she once called home, Seraphine Vale paced endlessly. Her hands trembled, and her breathing came in uneven bursts. She insisted to the sheriff that she had no idea where Rowan went, and claimed he left early that morning after a heated argument. Her story shifted slightly each time she told it, creating doubt and confusion. The officers noticed her unsteady behavior and the way she avoided certain questions. They watched her closely, sensing her fear, but unsure of its source. In the afternoon, a pair of searchers discovered something unsettling near the riverbank, a single muddy boot print that matched Seraphine's shoe size. It stood out sharply against the soft mud, clear enough that Sheriff Rook frowned at the sight of it. He followed the trail back toward the woods, but it ended abruptly near a patch of thick brush. No footprints from Rowan appeared nearby, raising more questions than answers. When confronted with the evidence, Seraphine insisted she had gone on a short walk earlier, but had turned back before reaching the river. Her explanation sounded weak, and even she seemed doubtful of her own words. Amara, hearing about the footprint, felt her stomach twist. She tried to remember any signs she had missed, any strange behavior from her mother before the betrayal was revealed. The unease she had felt for weeks began to sharpen into fear. She started wondering if something far worse had been happening behind the closed doors of her home, something beyond infidelity. As the search continued into the evening, the forest grew darker, and the volunteers gradually retreated back to town. Rumors swirled like cold wind. Some believed Rowan disappeared out of guilt and shame. Others suspected foul play. A few whispered that Seraphine's fragile state might have driven her to do something unthinkable. Amara listened to the voices around her, but none of them knew the truth she carried. Seraphine was not just fragile, she was unpredictable, emotional, and capable of things Amara had never imagined before. The tension reached its peak when the police found signs of a struggle near an old fence line behind the Velden property. Broken branches, disturbed soil, and a piece of fabric that appeared torn from a jacket. The color matched one Rowan often wore during his carpentry work. Sheriff Rook ordered a more intensive search of the area, but the daylight had already faded, forcing the team to wait until morning. Amara felt a growing dread settle deep in her chest. She knew the situation was spiraling towards something dark and irreversible. Rowan's disappearance was no accident, and the clues were pointing toward a frightening possibility. But even with the shock she had already endured, she had no idea how twisted the truth would become, or how deeply her mother's secrets were buried in the shadows of Riverwynd. Amara returned to the house she once loved with a feeling of dread pressing on her chest. The police had advised her to gather a few personal belongings before staying somewhere safer, and she agreed, though every step toward the front door made her pulse quicken. The home felt colder now, stripped of its warmth and comfort. Each piece of furniture appeared unfamiliar, as if belonging to someone else's life rather than her own. She moved carefully, unsure of what she might discover in the silence of the rooms. She entered Seraphine's guest room with the intention of packing a few clothes and essentials for her mother, though she was unsure whether Seraphine would ever need them again. The scent of lavender hung in the air, a stark contrast to the growing fear twisting in Amara's stomach. She began opening drawers and sorting through items with mechanical precision, trying not to think about the betrayal that had shattered everything she believed. Her hands shook as she lifted folded blouses and scarves, placing them neatly into a suitcase. When she reached for a stack of old blankets on the top shelf of the closet, something small and leather-bound slid out and fell to the floor with a dull thud. Amara paused, staring at it as though it were something dangerous. She knelt and picked it up. The cover was faded and worn, the edges soft from years of handling. It was Seraphine's handwriting on the first page that made her breath hitch. A journal, one she had never seen before. A part of her wanted to close it and walk away, but another part, a stronger, more desperate part, needed to know the truth. She sat on the bed and opened the journal to the earliest entry. The words were unsettling. Seraphine had written about loneliness, resentment, and a kind of envy that seemed to grow quietly inside her. As Amara flipped through the pages, those feelings deepened, turning into obsession. Rowan's name appeared more often than her own daughter's. Seraphine wrote about how she admired him, depended on him, needed him. The tone shifted from admiration to fixation, each page darker than the last. Amara's heart pounded as she reached a section that described detailed fantasies of a life where Rowan belonged solely to Seraphine. The journal revealed how Seraphine believed Amara didn't appreciate him, how she viewed herself as the one truly connected to him. The words were delusional, filled with a dangerous blend of desire and entitlement. Amara felt sick reading them, but she couldn't stop. She needed to understand the truth, no matter how painful it was. Then she reached the entry that froze her in place. It described a plan to set things right, to remove any obstacles between herself and Rowan. Seraphine wrote about a trip they would take together, far from Riverwynd, far from anyone who might judge them. She spoke of eliminating anything that could prevent that escape. The date on the entry matched the night Rowan disappeared. Amara felt her breath catch in her throat. She clutched the journal tightly, numb and trembling. She handed the journal to Sheriff Rook later that day, her voice breaking as she explained how she found it. The sheriff read the entries with a grim expression, then organized a new search effort based on the details Seraphine had unknowingly provided. The journal mentioned a place Seraphine remembered from her youth, an abandoned quarry miles from town. It had once been a mining site, but had long since been forgotten. The search team headed there immediately, guided by the clues hidden in Seraphine's writing. The quarry loomed like a scar in the earth, surrounded by rusted metal beams and overgrown brush. The investigators combed through the area until one of them called out, Caught on a jagged piece of metal was a scrap of fabric, blue, torn, the same shade Rowan often wore during his work. It fluttered gently in the wind, the only movement in the silence. Amara stood behind the police tape, gripping her arms as a cold, heavy realization settled inside her. Amara had not simply betrayed her, she had spiraled into something far more dangerous, something that blurred the line between desire and destruction. Rowan's disappearance was no longer a mystery of shame or guilt. It was part of a plan written in her own hand. And Amara knew, with a chill that reached her bones, that the truth hidden in the quarry was only the beginning. The darkest revelation had yet to be uncovered.